CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joins us now. He's in Lviv, Ukraine, which is about 50 miles from the border with Poland. Imtiaz, the leaders of Poland, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic traveled to Kyiv today to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. How significant is that visit, and are there any details on their discussions?
Elaine, good to talk to you. I mean, it's hard to even describe how significant this is. You know, I've been, frankly, covered quite a few conflicts in my time, and I really can't point to a time where I've seen the prime ministers of 3 European countries travel into another country that is actively under invasion. I just haven't seen it. So it is a real extraordinary show of support for Volodymyr Zelensky and indeed for the Ukrainian people. But it's not just a symbolic show of support. These leaders of these European countries are also coming with a message from the European Commission and indeed the wider European Union to say, we're helping you financially, we're also going to help you diplomatically, we are here for you, that Europe is here for Ukraine. And we also have to add to all of that, in the background of all of this, the EU has also announced its 4th round of very tough, very punishing sanctions on Russia. So in many ways, Europe is really putting its money where its mouth is, but more importantly, showing its support for Ukraine in a way that, frankly, we haven't seen before. And again, those images of these prime ministers of the Czech Republic, of Slovenia, and indeed of Poland to be here in this country, to go to Kiev, and we've seen those horrific images of violence in this city, which has just been staggering. For them to go there to sort of, really brace for that kind of threat, again, to show this support is pretty extraordinary indeed. Guys.
Imtiaz, we know about the ongoing talks between Russia and Ukraine. What's the latest on that front?
Enrique, a real sort of sense of hope, if I'm honest with you. We've had multiple rounds of talks which really haven't achieved anything. And yet in the last 24 hours, we've heard from the Prime Minister, Volodymyr Zelensky, saying in his own sort of folksy way that the talks were going pretty good. We also had the Russians who were saying that they've made significant progress, and that's a direct quote from them. Now, what exactly that means at this stage, it's hard to say. They haven't been very clear, but let's just outline what Russia wants, because Russia has made it clear what it wants. It wants guarantees that Ukraine never joins NATO. They want it to be enshrined in law here. They want the constitution changed to make sure that Ukraine never joins NATO. They also want the Ukrainian government to acknowledge that Crimea, that area in the south that was annexed by Russian forces in 2014, that they recognize that formally as part of Russia. And the last key part of this as well is that the Russians want the Ukrainian government to acknowledge that these independent republics of Donetsk and Luhansk are independent. Now, that's a lot going on there, and the question, of course, is, well, what do the Ukrainians want? Well, they, of course, want the fighting to stop. But more importantly, what Volodymyr Zelensky has said is that he will not surrender, and he, more importantly, will not sort of go to any sort of Russian demands without any kind of assurances for Ukraine's safety. Now, again, we haven't been told explicitly what those demands are, but we do understand through sort of the back channeling that we've been doing that the Ukrainian leadership may accept a scenario where that they say they will not join NATO, but they want a promise either from the US, from the EU, from the broader international community for their security. That if they make an agreement with Russia that puts this war behind us, this now 20-day very brutal war which has displaced so many people and has left so many people dead, that if they agree to some of these terms, that Russia just won't roll in 6 months later and do exactly what they're doing now. They want some sort of security concession and concern. Elaine, Enrique.
It's really interesting to hear about that dynamic, Imtiaz, especially given the fact that we've seen civilians targeted in these attacks. So what is it like where you are, Imtiaz? You're in Lviv, as we mentioned, fairly close to Poland. The city has not so far seen any major attacks. Give us an update on the situation. What have you been seeing there?
Yeah, Elaine, it's I mean, it's surreal. If I'm really honest with you, it's very surreal being here. You know, Lviv is this beautiful city, sort of, you know, one of the most beautiful cities, if you will, in the sense that its historic center is a UNESCO heritage site. I mean, that's just what a storybook of a place this is. And yet everywhere you look in the corner of your eye, you see something that reminds you that Ukraine is a nation under war. You see these historic statues that are wrapped in protective scaffolding and just bits of plastic, just in case bombs start falling on the city. They want to protect that heritage. And even during the day, you'll hear air raid sirens. So people have to go run into basements or wherever they can to kind of protect themselves. But just very quickly, a little story. We were out today filming, and we went to an orphanage for children with special needs. And, you know, these are children who were displaced just less than a week ago from the east of the country, which has seen so much violence. And they came here to Lviv for safety. They're staying in sort of a boarding house. And, you know, we were there and they're playing and it's the sunshine. It was a really nice warm day and those sirens started blaring again. And their teachers had to take their little hands and run them into the school. And the children were so confused and so uncertain as to what was happening. And again, these are some of the most vulnerable children. These are orphans. These are children with developmental issues, physically and mentally. And I was talking to one of the teachers and I said, you know, how are you doing this and what are you telling these kids? And all she said is, all we can do is tell them that they're loved and that they're safe. And I think that's what so many parents here in Ukraine want. And one final thought, this is a day that also marks 3 million Ukrainians, now refugees, having fled this country. So the humanitarian catastrophe here is really just growing. Elaine, Enrique.
3 million refugees. Staggering number. Thank you so much, Imtiaz Tyab from Lviv in Ukraine.
My pleasure, guys.